in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, the Church becomes a wholly horizontal phenomenon.
Nobody.
When Christ is really present in the Eucharist, the Church turns into a fuzzy, flat thing. No one, not even the cardinals who are close to the Curia, thought the Vatican would say something like that. The Holy See's press office sent out a message 5 minutes before noon Rome time. It was so short and simple that many people thought it was a mistake. His Eminence Robert Cardinal Sarah has been given a new job within the Holy See by His Holiness, Pope Leo XIV. We will give you more information later. Nothing is written about it, there is no news conference, and there is no title. But in just 5 minutes the Catholic world was on fire. The priest Cardinal Sarah, who was born in Guinea, was known for his strong defense of the faith. The man who clearly and quietly did not agree with Pope Francis on many issues, ranging from changing the way the Mass is celebrated to ideas about gender roles. Many people thought that this man had been pushed to the side during the last pope. He is now left to give talks in Paris and sermons in Dakar. He wasn't told to be quiet anymore, he was called back. I'm not into retiring with a ceremony. We are, however, going on to something new that will keep us busy for years. Sarah stood for the most traditional part of the Church, and was a hero to those who wanted Latin Masses teaching that didn't change, and theological clarity. He was also a lightning rod for progressive criticism. Some people said he was strict, left out and nostalgic while pretending to be holy. Still, Pope Leo XIV made him a bishop again. Why? What could possibly drive a new pope, who is already known for being nice, reformist, and focused on including everyone, to seek out a man who is often seen as the exact opposite of him? Ideas spread very quickly. Was this an attempt to make the conservatives in the Church happy? Did Leo want to keep things in balance as pope by including views from the global south? Or was there a deeper reason, a move in strategy that meant a new definition, instead of giving in? No matter what the answer was, one thing was certain. Robert Sarah, Cardinal, was no longer sent away. He came back. How about the part that Pope Leo made for him? It wasn't a title of honor. It wasn't a sign. It was important to the goal. While the rest of the world fights over theory and direction, Leo XIV seems to remember what his predecessors often forgot. People who don't want to change can make the way forward. As of Sarah's return, the stage is set for a church that is marked by difference rather than conflict. Cardinal Robert Sarah stood for unwavering belief for almost 10 years, which was something the Vatican didn't quite get. While Pope Francis was still a young pope, Sarah's rise was still going strong after she was appointed by Pope Benedict XVI. He stood out in Rome because he was from Africa, lived an ascetic life, and had a strong religious background, but also a risk in the long run. He was head of the Congregation for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments until 2021 when he quit. The Vatican told him that he had to quit at age 75, which is the normal age for bishops and curial leaders. Even so, everyone in the Curia knew it wasn't true. A former Vatican official said that he was pushed to the side. It's too clear, too strong, and too stable. Sarah's disagreements with Francis' plans were never made public. He never yelled or scolded people in public. His writing, on the other hand, was sharp, creative, and honest, so it was easy to see what he thought. He was against letting divorced and remarried people join the Church. He didn't like how religious rules were being loosened and said it was spiritual disfigurement. Others said that priestly celibacy wasn't needed anymore, but he stood up for it. He warned over and over that the Church was losing its sense of what is holy in favor of what is important to society. Many people saw his 2019 book The Day Is Now Far Spent as a subtle attack on the direction the Vatican is taking. It was translated into many languages and sold over 200,000 books without getting a single recommendation from a current Vatican official. He changed into something of a ghost when he got to Rome. With his red cassock on and kneeling in quiet prayer, he was often seen at masses. Throughout Europe and Africa, he gave talks. He went to areas that were on the edges. But the calls from different parts of the Vatican stopped. He wasn't asked to talk. A top Frenchman said that he wasn't asked to give advice, but when he spoke the seats were full. Many people were looking forward to hearing what he had to say. Sarah never played the victim though. He wouldn't say anything bad about Pope Francis by name in talks. When asked about being fired, he just smiled and said, "I serve wherever God puts me." Some people thought that was the end of him. Other people saw it as a relic, a throwback, or the last gasp of the Benedict XVI age, but they were wrong. A bishop from Senegal said that silence does not mean giving up. We know how important it is to wait in Africa, and he did. While the church talked about synods and statements, Sarah did what he always did: read, prayed, served, and watched. In Francis's last years, there was a lot of scandal, fighting, and a flock that was becoming more split. He saw as the voices on both sides got louder, more angry, and less ready to listen. He saw young seminarians lose hope because of the lack of clarity, and went back to studying Latin in secret. Sarah was there when the doors to the meeting shut, and Pope Francis died. There was no marketing or angling. They were just there. Some people thought he had no chance of becoming pope. He caused too much trouble. Way too strict. However, that might not have been his job, because a few weeks later, under a new pope, the impossible happened. The phone went off. It came in quietly. There was no group or statement. It's just a call. The phone rang at Cardinal Robert Serra's simple home on the outskirts of Rome, where he had been living since he retired. There was a small stone house with African symbols and well-worn religious books inside. There was also the silence of a man who had given up on getting much from Vatican phone calls. But it rang that morning. He replied. Pope Leo XIV was on the other end. "Robert," the voice said, quiet and comfortable. "Let's talk." There was a 43-minute call. Sources say that this wasn't a demand or an order. It was an answer. Pope Leo is said to have said, "I have been listening to the church, and I believe we cannot build unity without including those who felt pushed away." At first Sarah didn't say anything. He didn't believe them. The man knew a lot about politics. Men would cheer one year and then erase the next. That wasn't nice though. This was clear and honest. The new pope praised Sarah's honesty, bravery, and most of all his faith. Leo XIV told him, "You stood your ground. I need you to walk with me into the future, not the past." Sarah was shocked. Many people saw this pope as a peacemaker. He was a moderate reformer raised in Francis's style who was also very aware of the growing split in the church. Why talk to the man who is most linked to the other side? That's when Leo made it clear. He told her, "I'm not trying to shut you up. You are being asked to help in a clear way." Next they offered to lead a new office that focuses on global renewal instead of internal bureaucracy. They didn't want to go back to overseeing liturgies or being stuck in an advisory role. Sarah asked for some time to pray. He said he didn't expect anything less. Leo. Sarah did the same things he always did for 5 days. She went to Mass by herself, read the Bible, and walked in the yard outside his house. He didn't talk to any news crews. We didn't do any interviews. But people who knew him well say they saw peace in his face, which they hadn't seen in years, because the Pope didn't ask him to change. He wanted him to serve again, but this time on a task that felt more like a calling than a job. After 5 days, Cardinal Sarah agreed, but not with any conditions or exceptions. She said, "I've never sought titles, but if this helps the church, I will walk," and that was the end of it. The fiery theologian, the controversial cardinal, the so-called exile, was now quietly getting ready for a job that would take him further than any other curia job had ever gone, into a broken church that needs someone to show it what true belief looks like, when it's wrapped up in weakness. When the Vatican finally put out the full message, it wasn't buried in vague or complicated liturgical language. It was brave, clear, and new for many people in Rome. Robert Cardinal Sarah is named Special Papal Envoy to the Global South by His Holiness, Pope Leo XIV. His job is to strengthen ties between traditional Catholic communities, and the main goal of unity, evangelization, and doctrinal fidelity. The job had never been filled before. No one had held the position before, so there was no example or guideline. It was made especially for Sarah, by Pope Leo XIV. Within hours, Vatican reporters were rushing to figure out what it meant. A sign of meaning, a way to reach out to the conservatives. Is there something more going on? Because the title seemed like something extra, but people who worked there said that the power it gave was very real. Sarah refused to tell the Secretary of State what was going on. He would tell the Pope everything. As part of his job, he had to speak for the Vatican in episcopal negotiations in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, give advice to bishops' conferences on the link between liturgical tradition and modern pastoral care, and act as a go-between for areas that were facing rising secularism, persecution, and internal division. Most importantly, traditional Catholic communities that have been left out of the Church's world mission need to be brought back in. The short answer is that Cardinal Sarah was not living in a museum. He was sent to fight on the front lines. It was a surprise to everyone. The move shocked and even confused people in the Curia. A Vatican official is said to have said, "It's like the Pope reached into the past to build the future," but not all of them were negative. As he read the note, a young Nigerian priest who works in the Congregation for Bishops smiled. He said, "This is not politics. It's about you." Leo knows where and how faith is growing, because he knows Sarah talks the language of growth. In fact, the numbers don't lie. Africa and Southeast Asia, especially sub-Saharan Africa, have seen the fastest rise of Catholicism in the world over the last 20 years. Instead of marketing efforts, martyrs, missionaries, and movements are what are making the Church grow there. Still, many people in these areas feel cut off from Rome because of arguments about synodality, gender, and new liturgies that focus on the West. Sarah is a unique mix of African spirituality and Roman orthodoxy. He has strong faith and is very familiar with the suffering Church. Outside of Europe, people responded right away. In Kinshasa, the St. Charles Luangwa Cathedral rang its bells. Seminarians from Cebu shared Sarah's quote, "The West is dying because it has forgotten how to kneel." Even people who didn't like Sarah noticed. He had a disagreement with a Jesuit philosopher at a liturgical conference. In a blog post, that theologian said, "Whether you like him or not, you must now deal with him." The Pope picked involvement over being sent away. That clears everything up. Sarah said yes to the meeting in a short letter when she got back to Rome. "There's no big deal. There isn't a news event, just these words. I will go where the Church tells me to, and I will only talk about the faith and not my ideas." One time, this man was called too strict for modern Catholicism, but he was sent not to protect the past, but to move forward with it. Shocks happen inside the Vatican all the time. But Cardinal Robert Sarah's return was one of the few choices in recent years that sent such clear and controversial shockwaves through the halls. Some people think it was the first mistake Pope Leo XIV made as Pope. Some people thought it was his bravest move yet. Behind the walls of the Vatican, people's reactions came in waves: shock, doubt, and then a slow but growing realization. There's more to this than meets the eye. This is a plan. People had different reactions to the dicastor for the teaching of the faith. A high-level figure with ties to Francis's government was said to have sighed. This person wanted to bring back the Latin Mass everywhere. Are we giving him more power now? However, a lower official who spoke on the record disagreed. It's not about giving him power. People in the other half of the Church need to be heard, and given a role that won't destroy the house. Yes, of course, Sarah was not put in charge of a curial department by Pope Leo IV. He was also not in charge of liturgy or teaching. He gave him something more dangerous instead, a voice and a goal outside of the government. The Vatican News Corps' coverage was just as divided. There were opinion pieces in progressive Catholic media that warned of the dangers of restorationism, and the rehabilitation of hardliners. "The Return of Rigor" was the title of one story, but platforms for traditionalists erupted in joy. On Catholic Twitter, the most shared picture showed Pope Leo IV in white smiling softly, and Cardinal Sarah in red, eyes down, holding a breviary. This picture has a text that says 2 pillars, 1 church. Some people who keep an eye on the Vatican thought this might lead to a new ideological fight, this time between Leo and Sarah instead of Francis and Benedict. But people close to Leo say he expected and even enjoyed the stress. One Curia worker said, "He's not building camps. He is putting up hallways between sounds that have forgotten how to talk to each other." It is said that the Pope told his advisors, "If you shut down every voice that questions you, you will end up alone." And by themselves is not a place for Peter's replacement. And Sarah, the Cardinal, he didn't say anything bad about them. There's not a news event. A reporter asked him if he thought his part was a comeback, and he said, "This is not a return. I've never left. I was just praying. I'm going to walk." Even people who didn't like him were surprised by how strong but not angry he was. because Sarah would not be brought back to fight. Even though he had previously disagreed with Francis's plans, he had to be brought back as proof. The Vatican is used to sending cautious messages and moving slowly. So Leo's clear move said more than any encyclical. If the Church cuts off the prophets' heads, it can't be whole. The press meeting was not in Rome, but in Nairobi, at the home of the Archbishop. It was very short, not velvet curtains or thrones with gold trim, just Cardinal Robert Sarah, a long table, a few mics, and God, who didn't say a word until the cameras stopped rolling. He didn't have glasses or a political grin on his face. All he wore was a red mozzetta, and a rosary around his fingers. After that he spoke, not with fire but with strength. I don't look for things, I help. With those 6 words, Cardinal Sarah stopped the news for a whole day. There was no talk of disagreement, liturgical wars or past popes or rival groups. When asked directly about his past fights with Vatican leaders, Sarah said, "I'm not here to argue about the past. For those who feel ignored, I'm here to bring Christ to the poor, broken, and faith-filled." He confirmed that he is now the special papal envoy to the Global South, and talked about his planned trips to Burkina Faso, Colombia, the Philippines, South Sudan, and then back to Europe to listen, not to teach. A Kenyan reporter asked him, "What is your message to Catholics who are torn between tradition and change?" This was the most important question of the event. Sarah didn't move. The truth stays the same, but to win over hearts, each generation needs a different method. Some people say I'm stiff. I think of myself as fixed. I'm okay with change if it comes from prayer. I'm afraid of change that comes from fear. Another reporter asked him what he thought about the reports that he was Leo IV's checkmate move to make the conservative base happy. Sarah answered with a careful, slow smile. Bishops are more than just pieces on the board. He helps people's souls. He thanked the Pope for believing in him. He thanked his brothers and sisters in Africa for their story. And to end, he said something that was heard far beyond Nairobi. It's not our job to be left or right, to be holy. We need to be. It won't be for praise if I speak. It's not to get stronger that I walk. I go where the shepherd sends me to find the sheep who have given up believing anyone is coming. He stood up, refused to shake hands, and walked out on his own, not with headlines following him, but with gravity, whether the world loves or hates him. Cardinal Sarah had returned not to reclaim a platform, but to lift a cross. In Rome, it's dubbed a master stroke. Not because it was flashy, not because it was expected. However, it shifted the center of gravity, without firing a single shot. When Pope Leo XIV appointed Cardinal Sarah as special envoy to the Global South, he did not simply resurrect a dormant prelate. He changed the terms of engagement in the Church. Over the last decade, Catholicism has been gripped by a false binary. You are either Francis or Benedict, progressive or traditional, compassionate or dogmatic. Pope Leo has now said, no, you can be both. You must be both. To heal this church, the voices that once stood across the aisle must now walk in the same direction. Leo XIV did something radical when he called Cardinal Sarah to serve in the mission fields rather than Rome. He gave tradition a task rather than a throne. He did not make Sarah the guardian of liturgy or doctrine. He didn't use him against progressives. He sent him to where the church is growing the fastest and breaking the deepest with a mandate to unify rather than rebuke. One Vatican watcher said it perfectly. Francis showed the world compassion. Benedict defended the truth. Leo is attempting to marry them, and Sarah has now joined that union. This does not mark the end of the church's division. It is not a magical healing, but it is a signal from the very top that the old walls are falling down. Not by tearing them up, however, by inviting both builders and critics to rebuild together. And for a church battered by scandal, ideology and attrition, that message may be the first indication of something it hasn't felt in years. Hope, because if Cardinal Robert Sarah can rediscover his place, not in opposition but in mission, then perhaps the church can too.